Creating the illusion of depth and space. In drawing, we represent three-dimensional objects and their depth relationships on a two-dimensional surface. So these are just, techniques are just creating the illusion of depth and space. It's not real depth and space. So here's an example of a photograph which flattens space, and it's showing example actually of one-point perspective, which we'll learn about shortly. I have a recommended reading here for you. It's a really great book. It's really short kind of read, very small book, inexpensive, but it has a lot of really good tips. So you can check that out if you want. This is a photo of, from New York City in 1940s. So creating the illusion of depth and space, how do we do this? Through size changes or scale, overlapping, color and value changes, and linear perspective. We're going to look at each of these one by one. Size changes, scale. Objects that are closer are shown larger than objects that are further away. So this is an Ernie Barnes painting called the Sugar Shack. You can see the people back here are much smaller than the people in the front. More size changes. This is a new term for shortening, to shorten the lines of an object in a drawing so that as to produce an illusion or a projection or extension in space. So this horse by Christopher Welsh is very foreshortened. It's in graphite on paper, and it's so short that you can't see that how the nose of the horse is three-dimensional. This is a painting by Mantegna, a very famous painting of the Lamentation of Christ. And notably, the feet in this painting were actually reduced in size because in foreshortening they would be much, much bigger, and they would be kind of an awkward painting to have this image have bigger feet. So the artist took the liberty to scale down the feet. Here's some more foreshortening and examples of when you would use it. You can see this in a hand, and you can do this yourself with your hand. If you have your hand facing you, the fingers get much shorter than if the hand is just flat like this, or if the hand is going away from you, the fingers get much shorter as well. Overlapping. So this is the second technique to show depth and space. When objects are overlapped, a sense of distance is created because one seems to be in front of or behind another, implying three-dimensional space. Here's a painting by Ellis Wilson, and you can see overlapping in these two people here in front of this person here, so that we know that this person is in front of this person, in front of that person, and this person is in front of this person. You can also see scale changes in the back, how these people are much shorter than the people in the foreground. The third technique, color and value changes. The colors of objects seem to be less saturated and shift towards blue when they are viewed from a distance. There's less clarity of detail and the contrast decreases. The images appear hazy because of the atmosphere in the background. So this is a very early example of this. I don't know if you can totally see this, but there's some hazy mountains in the back here, or rocks, I guess. And then the rocks get clearer as they get closer. And then you even develop here, you have some leaves and things on the rocks and more highlights and details on the rocks here. So things are a little bit clearer in the foreground than the background. So this was first found in the Brancacci chapel paintings, starting with Masaccio in 1425, and even before that in antiquity. And it was rediscovered by Masaccio, Brunelleschi, and Donatello around the same time. And Da Vinci popularized the effect. This is Da Vinci, once again, oil on the rocks, Virgin on the rocks, oil painting. This is another example of creating color and value changes. It's a new term, atmospheric perspective, which is a method of creating the illusion of depth in a painting or drawing by modulating color to simulate changes affected by the atmosphere on color seen at a distance. Here's a great example in this photograph by Jim Goldstein. And you can see as the hills go back, that they become much grayer and less distinct and darker as they come forward. And in the very foreground, you can even make out the details of the individual rocks, which you certainly cannot do anywhere back here. So that's an example of atmospheric perspective, which relates to how we see. And this is another example. This shows you foreground, middle ground, and background. And I was just kind of explaining what these terms are, because it does relate to atmospheric perspective, because things in the background appear often hazier. So the foreground refers to the area closest to the viewer, which is up here. The middle ground is the area somewhere in the middle, and the background is usually behind the horizon line. So the area in the foreground has the most detail, and the details in color, as you can see, are not as intense as you move back in this image. So the dulling of color and decreasing of detail creates the effect of atmospheric perspective. So can you see that the trees here have far more details than the trees all the way back here? You wouldn't be able to see that just because of our vision, the way our vision works. Linear perspective. This is the fourth method. This is a system developed during the Renaissance using lines to organize a picture plane, a horizon line showing the viewer's eye level, and one or more vanishing points that show the edges of the viewer's peripheral vision where the lines appear to converge. The horizon line. This is the place where the land and sky appear to meet. They do not actually meet this line, but they appear to meet there. You can see that in this particular image. And also vanishing point. This is the single point on the horizon where all lines on the ground level seem to be coming together. So you can see this in an example. Here's an horizon line image by Jeremy Wade Shockley, and a Natasha Gray photograph that shows you here a one-point perspective going down these lines. Linear perspective. Orthogonals. So orthogonals, or convergence lines, are parallel lines that appear to get closer together as they recede into the distance and meet at a single vanishing point. All parallel lines will eventually converge at a vanishing point. So these show you examples of where are the orthogonals, which are the lines along the side, and here's the vanishing point. This particular image has orthogonals going to two different vanishing points. So these are the orthogonal lines. Here's one-point perspective, two different examples. One has one-point perspective in the middle. You can see over here. And one has one-point perspective off to the side, to the right. It's still one-point perspective even if it's off-center. So it just means that it's going to a single point on a horizon line. And these are different photographs from these two different artists. When do you use one-point perspective? Well, when rendering objects that have relatively flat sides, such as books and buildings. Here's an example of a cassette tape in extreme perspective, 1 point. Also, drawing interiors, like you can see there's 1-point perspective here on this room interior, and it's being used to sketch out this floor in this particular image. And then you can see here what happens when you have boxes that are below the horizon line, on the horizon line, and above the horizon line. So here's a high horizon, here's a middle horizon, and here's a low horizon. And here are objects in relationship to the horizon line. So you can see that the image above looks like it's floating, like a plane or something like that. And then the image on the horizon would be more like a building. And the one below is something you're looking down on, like an aerial perspective, or if you're looking down at a book on a table. So here is a video that I made with 1-point perspective in 2001. I worked as an animator on this video, and I made the backgrounds. Oops, apparently it didn't play. There you go. So I made this video when I was working for a company called Antonic, and I was the animator on this show. And this is from 2001 when video compression was terrible, so I'm sorry about the quality of that, but it shows you a really good example of one-point perspective and how that was used. So here's two-point perspective, two separate vanishing points on the horizon line. That's what two-point perspective is. And you have here an example of a building where lines go down this way and down this way to a separate point. Same thing on this. We have lines going down this way and lines going down this way to a separate vanishing point. And this is a painting by Edward Hopper on the left. When do you use this? Well, drawing buildings. Anytime you see a corner of a building, you're drawing two-point perspective, or you're looking at two-point perspective. If you see an interior corner, you're looking at two-point perspective. So you're looking at this line. You see this line right here? This line is very important, and when we're going to be doing our drawings, you'll be using this line to determine how big buildings are. So two-point perspective, this just shows you a high horizon line and kind of a middle horizon line, and this looks like you're looking down on something. Well, this looks like you're looking at a building. I wanted to also point out, this is really important, this middle line, as I was talking about, look how it determines how big this building is. Also, look at this building is, with the vanishing points, look how far apart the vanishing points are on each. If you spread your vanishing points further apart, you'll have less extreme perspective. So these are like a little further apart in relation to the size. You can see that it looks a little stretched. So this is an example of what happens to an object outside the vanishing points in two-point perspective. This is a drawing that was done for me by a student, and you can see that here's one building in two-point perspective, and here is another building in two-point perspective, yet we have 1, 2, 3 vanishing points on the page. So it looks like a street scene down the middle, and you can continue having additional vanishing points to the right as you create another set of two-point items like these buildings. So here we have three-point perspective, 2 vanishing points on the horizon and 1 in the sky or on the ground. Why would you do this? Well, to get 2 down here and then 1 in the sky. Well, this is a very small example of a fictional floating building that has this. Here's some other buildings that you can see. And this happens when you're looking down, like flying above in a plane, or if you're a bird, bird's eye view is what it's called, from the top of skyscrapers, or if you're looking from the very bottom of a skyscraper and looking up. So here's an example of a photo from a New York City photo from 1934. 4-point perspective means 2 vanishing points above, one above, one below, and 1 left and 1 right. And you would use this when you want to make it look as if you're looking through a peephole, or when you're drawing on a sphere, such as these M.C. Escher drawings here, or looking through this peephole here. 5-point perspective. So this is even more complicated. You have 2 vanishing points. You have a vanishing point above, below, left, right, and in the middle. Why would you do this? Well, when you're looking in a circular mirror. 6-point perspective. The 6th point is actually missing from a 5-point perspective drawing. So if you took the 5-point perspective drawing, you can see that would be like this drawing. This is actually what's behind you. Super complicated. So within 5-point, we get half a hemisphere of the visual world around us. To get the rest of the picture, the whole picture, you have to add the last vanishing point. So if you turn around and look at the room behind you to see the rest of the room, and that's the last vanishing point. So multiple vanishing points, this shows you along a path, you can have multiple vanishing points, and this is great if you want to create a fictional path and have it change directions. You would just have it go to differing vanishing points. Some circles in perspective, we'll be looking at this a little later when we do bottles. So you can see that a circle, when it changes in perspective, turns into an oval and an ellipse. Here's some cylinders in 1-point perspective. You can see that a box is drawn first, and then the cylinder is put within the box. This shows you a bunch of different cylinders in 1-point perspective and how they're in boxes. This just shows you how the top of the oval changes as it gets closer to the horizon line. You can see we see less of that oval. Here's more cylinders, but in 2-point perspective. So you would draw them first in a 2-point box, as these examples show. When do you use these? Well, when drawing car tires or bottles. So it actually occurs pretty often in drawing. And yeah, the secret to drawing a cylinder is just to construct the cylinder from a box and then lightly sketch a box in perspective. So you can see more of these boxes. So here's a recap. So these are the 4 methods for creating an illusion of depth and space: size changes, overlapping, color and value changes, and linear perspective. How do people use these techniques in their work? Well, maybe you can see if you can figure out what techniques these artists are using. Here's a Robin O'Neill picture. And I want to ask you, can you see any overlapping? Any size changes in scale? How about any atmospheric perspective? Any linear perspective? What about this one? What do you see in this one? Well, I can see some size changes here, right? And do I see value changes? Maybe not. Huh? But I see some scale changes, overlapping. Well, this person is overlapping that person. There's also a size change. This person is overlapping these people. Linear perspective, you can see along this table right here. It recedes in space along this direction. And also, look at these houses, how they get smaller as they go back in space. And they also have perspective as well on the roofs. This is a mural by Carlos Hernandez Chavez. This is a painting by Basile called Bathers. And you can see in it 1-point perspective along this area. You see the grass. And also, do you see any overlapping or any value changes? I see overlapping on these 2 people here and scale changes. This person is smaller than this person here. But look at the background here. There really is no sense of atmospheric perspective here. I don't see a lot of changes in terms of values as this goes back in space. So it can be a choice whether you use all of these things or not. This is a Jacob Lawrence painting called Street to Mabari. And in here, you can faintly see some 1-point perspective along this area, the street scene. Overlapping is used all over the place, and people overlapping other people. And size changes, there are much smaller people in the back. And this one, once again, I don't see a lot of atmospheric perspective, so space is kind of flattened a little bit. This one, though, has a lot of atmospheric perspective. This is Bierstadt oil painting, and you can see, look what's going on in the back, how much hazier it is along this area than in this area. You also have some 1-point perspective going along here, along this path, and trees are getting smaller as they recede in space, so you have scale changes. Kerry James Marshall painting. And in here, what do you see? Well, I see some overlapping right here. Some size changes of this tree versus this tree and this tree. And do you see any linear perspective? I don't really see any, but maybe there's some. And what about atmospheric perspective? Maybe a little bit back here, how things are less detailed back here, right? This is a painting by Juan Carlos Boxer, and it's a great example of some linear perspective along this area. You can see it even changes a little bit as it goes in. There's also some size changes in the boats and in the houses. And some color and value changes are not extremely apparent as things are going back into space. A painting by Enrique Chavarria. It's an oil painting, and you can see that definitely, oops, there it is, wait till this disappears. Well, okay, there's 1 point perspective down here within these bricks. Actually, sorry, 2 point perspective within these bricks because we're looking at a corner, right? And there's also some size changes. This guy's a little smaller than that one. And do you see any atmospheric perspective, maybe? It's getting darker or hazier in the areas. Maybe not. But we saw size changes, overlapping while this person is in front of this wall. So they are definitely in front of that. But I don't really see a lot of other overlapping examples. Here's a Magritte painting. And this shows some 1 point perspective in the bird cage. We also see some overlapping of this cage, for example, on this bird. So we know that the cage is in front of the bird. And so we have linear perspective, overlapping size changes. I don't see a lot of. And then atmospheric perspective. Well, it's kind of hazier in the ocean back here than it is in the foreground right there. I don't know if you can see that. Another Magritte painting showing scale changes in the people and value changes in the people in the foreground from the background. So some atmospheric perspective, some linear perspective in the roofs and in the house over here, the building over here. So we've got size, scale, size, overlapping of people, value changes, and linear perspective. This is a De Chirico example of like a linear perspective that's not totally accurate, but it's still a really interesting artwork. You can see that there'd be a point over here, but then why doesn't this go to that same point? So it doesn't really make sense in terms of linear perspective. Do you see any size changes or overlapping in this particular painting? Well, I see a lot of indications of size changes. Well, actually, look, it does get smaller, these windows, as they get back in space. They do get smaller. I don't see a lot of atmospheric perspective, though. Here is actually, this is pretty crazy, this is a handmade pastel on the sidewalk. And it's not real, like this is just a big area that this person painted to look three-dimensional. And it totally looks like you can go in. So here's some questions for you to think about. What are the results of making drawings or paintings where the perspective is not accurate? Because some of the ones I just showed you weren't accurate, but they're still really interesting paintings and drawings, and maybe they're actually more interesting because they're inaccurate sometimes. So how do you know when perspective is correct? Can you tell when it's correct? Well, maybe sometimes you can tell, sometimes you can't. But look for these 4 things when you want to be able to see if things have accurate perspective. And that's the end of my lecture. Thank you.